Hello, everyone. I'm Mr. E.
And I'm Milton Mortimer, the Authenticator, and we are the Duality of Man. And today we dive headfirst into the gay ching.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this subject because, well, there's been a lot of stuff going on in the news lately, and it's a subject that does affect men, because obviously gay men, and there's
Ahem.
also the subject of transgenderism, but that's going to be in another video. But today, let's talk specifically about uh, gay and bisexual men, and the state of the community in 2023. Obviously, I'm straight, so I don't really have a window into this aside from the people that I know who are gay, including Dalton here.
Ahem.
But
Today I apparently am the human window because that's just what I'm here for. Apparently.
no, look, as someone who dates men, what's your opinion on the state of the gay community in 2023?
First of all, I think we once again need to delve into the stupidity that is feminist theory because I think a large part of the problem with the gay community, such as it is in this day and age, is a lot of gay men, for whatever reason, despite having no personal reason to get involved with women or femininity or feminism, seem to have bought the bullshit with regards to the feminist line as to why it's okay to be accepting of gay men. Because, see, historically, the main reason why gay men were considered pathological and were, in any meaningful sense, oppressed was because they didn't love women. And it was considered to be an immoral faux pas to not care about and revere women. But somewhere, I want to say in the 60s, although it probably existed in some form before that, because most things in relation to modern day feminism did. Um, there started to be this party line whereby feminists convinced themselves that it was acceptable to be accepting of gay men because gay men were feminine and interested in men just like women, and that gave rise to a lot of the gay stereotype of the shall we say flaming twink, which seems to be the only kind of representation gay men can get now. The phenomena of the masculine gay men, or any sort of masculine gay man, is completely foreign now. And I find that completely and utterly fucked, considering that very often the people fear mongering about homosexuality prior to the modern era were the upper middle class white women who found it morally objectionable that some men, for some reason, weren't slavishly devoted to them on impulse. So, in other words, it's
I
the
mean,
same kind of women that eventually adopted feminism, and yet somehow gay men's issues are only viewed within the prism of gay men are feminine like women and therefore they have been oppressed like women and therefore, rather than gay men being an extension of the category of men and therefore being subject to men's issues, which I personally think is more accurate.
it doesn't really make much sense to me that became like a prevalent stereotype within the gay community, because if you look back at history, like there was a lot of same-sex relationships back in ancient Greece, and they were still required to fulfill all the roles that men were required to fill it within Greek society. So like it didn't matter if they were gay; they still had to be like men and do the things that men were supposed to do in Greece.
Although, interestingly enough, ancient Greece didn't really differentiate between heterosexuality, homosexuality, and bisexuality. What mattered to the ancient Greek mind was what position you were filling in the sexual relationship. So, in other words, it was a great time to be a gay top, and bottoms, as usual, were still seen as lesser because they were filling the submissive feminine role. And at this point, I, a gay masculine bottom, sigh like nobody's business. Because it's just like no matter what culture you're in, if you literally take it up the ass, you are screwed apparently, both literally and metaphorically.
But yeah, regarding the uh way that feminists basically forced well not wouldn't say forced, but what's the word I'm looking for? Help me out here.
Co-opted the gay experience
Yes,
under the feminist rubric,
yes, thank you. God, my mind was
and
blanking.
thereby estranged them from the fact that they're men. Apparently,
Yeah, it's like you are men, like a lot of the issues that affect men also affect you, but they always seem what I, not always, I'm not talking about all gay people, but there seems to be a prevalence in the gay community to view things from the female perspective, despite the fact that they are men.
and I mean to some degree, some portion of that is somewhat inevitable, given that gay men, by sort of definition, court men, and therefore there's an argument to be made, and there are neurological studies that suggest that one of the reasons why gay men are gay is because there's a part of their brain that thinks more along the lines of women. That being said, there are still masculine gay men, and as with any sexual relationship, in order for the bottoms to be taken care of, there must be a top somewhere. I.e., if someone is taking the submissive feminine role, then they are going to desire a someone um taking on the masculine role, and of course they the masculine gay men also presumably would be the ones that want the feminine men. So never mind. But according to cultural context, every single gay man to a man literally is super. Thanks for asking.
I don't really, I never really understood that type of personality because you know I don't know, maybe it's different when it's gay people interaction, but whenever I see that, I'm a man and I'm trying to talk to you or converse with somebody like as one man to another, but
Yeah,
I find it very hard for like somebody with that type of personality to make a connection man to man.
yeah, and that's why you see a lot of extremely feminine gay men who are abjectly miserable because they can't find a man. Because
Well,
because
you would think that behaving more feminine would be a great detriment to them because like if you're gay and you like men, you would obviously be attracted to the qualities of men and masculinity.
again, it's not exactly that simple because much as you have the uh, submissive role and the dominant role in a heterosexual relationship, you also have that very often in gay relationships. Now, versus, which is the term for someone who can take up either role, sort of mess with this mathematics a little bit, but in general, gay men trend to either the dominant role or the submissive role. So there's always going to be a certain percentage of men that effectively, to use an informal parlance, are taking the woman's role in the relationship. So, in other words, even when there's a same sex relationship, you still have one person who is definitely the husband and one person who is definitely the wife. But yeah, in any case, I think it's down to the fact that so many feminine guys can't be feminine in a subtle, demure, coquettish sense, i.e., the sense that people are actually attracted to. They have to be feminine in a lot of negative ways, actually, in a very confrontational, very often catty, very often bitchy sort of feminine way. And
And a bit exaggerated too, I would say.
yeah, and speaking both for myself as someone who's actually dealt with this, and also just as someone who's intelligent enough to look at the way the wind is blowing and extrapolate from that, regardless of your sexuality, nobody wants to date a bitch. And in given a choice between someone who is a bitch and someone who is not a bitch, in general, most people will take the person who is not a bitch. So I don't even think feminine gay men are the problem. I think it's just that there is a certain percentage of those feminine gay men who embody all the worst aspects of femininity, which often, sad but true, we ignore when actual women do it, but because, again, instinctive gynocentrism, because we as a species don't inherently have as much of a regard for men as we do for women, not only do gay men acting feminine mess with our internal schematic, but also there's this bizarre thing where people are more willing to acknowledge the negative aspects of femininity in gay men than they are in women because of the innate instinctive blinders people have for the quote unquote sacredness of women.
Yeah, I think it's um well, I think biologically to some degree we are kind of pre-programmed to protect um the quote unquote fair sex because biologically speaking they are in a category that is on average weaker than us. But if that same behavior is then brought up to somebody who is supposed to be in our own category, it's a lot less tolerated.
It's also interesting when you take into account a lot of the radical feminist diatribe, by which I mean more radical than usual, because frankly, all feminism is fairly radical. But the self-identifying rad femme will literally define men as biologically inferior to women, as in they claim that the Y chromosome is actually a defect of a perfectly functional X chromosome. Um,
Then how does it that's how does a species propagate in that case?
I I don't know. Most rad femmes, unsurprisingly, don't really think that far ahead. But there is bizarrely an actual like you can squint and almost see an Evo Psych angle to this because men are physically stronger in general because they needed to be. Why did they need to be? Because women are considered more intrinsically valuable, and therefore, even back in the Stone Age, people went out of their way to lighten the load on women and to keep the women in the homestead raising the children, and therefore the male half of the species had to go out and fight the saber-toothed tigers and wildebeests and mammoths and whatnot, or other
Well,
assorted predators prior to this.
well, women uh when pregnant are extremely vulnerable, and if you like overstress them, it can lead to a miscarriage. So that's why we ancient men took most of the burden upon themselves. Also, because we were just more physically capable of handling, more dangerous things.
Well, what's interesting about that is that obviously that wasn't the case at the start. It became that way because evolution is how evolution is, and the men who were physically more imposing bred more. Whereas, surprisingly, it was the women who did not gain musculature that bred more. The ones that evoked things like neoteny and hypergamy and so on. The ones who were choosy with regards to their partners were the ones that survived more than the butch women. It's interesting on an evolutionary scale that we as a species just kind of let or maybe not even us as a species, but our predecessor species as species let
I
the
think it's
female half of their species just kind of languish indoors and
well, I think it's
forced the
playing out.
male half of their species out into the cold.
Well, I think it's playing out right now because when you think about it, in ancient times, why did women need men? Well, raw physical strength, and the women who are capable of exuding that same raw physical strength didn't need men, therefore didn't have children, therefore eventually died off. And you see nowadays, well, why would women need men? For money, resources, things like that. And the women who are capable of getting those resources themselves are now starting to become single, childless, and alone. And as a result, they will die out.
And then you add on to that the psychological aspect of men in general have an out-group preference, i.e., men on balance would rather hang out with women, whereas women in general have an in-group preference, meaning that they actually mostly, according to statistics, or at least implied heavily by statistics, view men as a means to an end that they have to take on for the sake of dealing with inconveniences more so than something they would actually want to engage with. But anyway, we got a little bit far scope of the topic of things gay, or I guess things LGB in this case. Which
Yeah.
I suppose we should then move on to the clusterfuck that is the idea that the gay identity is even a coherent thing, as in a collectivist hive mind that you must adhere to in order to be properly gay, air quotes. And if not, then you have internalized homophobia.
I mean, decades ago, there could be an argument as to why it became a community, in that people tend to group together of the same kind in order for survival, and gay people were very much persecuted decades ago. But you know now in 2023, I don't really see why people treated as such an insular community, and also why they treated as such a core part of their identity.
Now, there's an on the ground reason why this might be, and I don't think it has necessarily anything to do with ideology, which is facts of life be as they are, and in general, most people will be straight, or at the very least, straight leaning, i.e., they might be somewhat bisexual, like, on the Kinsey scale, but in general, most people seek heterosexual pair bonding. And so for the people who don't seek heterosexual pair bonding and in fact seek homosexual pair bonding, it is kind of a formative experience because you realize from an early age that you are significantly different from a lot of people. And in some ways, that is integral to your identity because, when a man hits on a woman, for the most part, people are okay and everything is functioning normally. When a woman hits on a man, what little that actually happens, everything is functioning fairly normally. But if you're a man and you happen to like other men, there's a chance you could get dumped in a ditch if you hit on the wrong man. Sad but true. So it is kind of just inherently an extra hurdle that most people will not have to deal with. So that level of camaraderie makes a certain amount of sense. And it especially makes a certain amount of sense when you consider that, like I mentioned earlier, given that on some level, gay male brains are more feminine than straight male brains, there is sort of a reason for, especially in a society that categorically does not give a fuck about men, for men who don't fill the masculine role, or at least, in the most basic sense, they don't court women. Um, it makes sense that that would kind of be a formative part of your identity. Where I draw the line is one, people are individuals, regardless of any circumstantial demographic they have in common, and two, identities aren't teams or hive minds. That doesn't mean you can't have friends of the same demographic. It doesn't mean you can't prefer your own kind, quote unquote. Although I personally think if you only are interested in people of your own kind, that is a little bit inherently small minded, but never mind. Um, but there isn't a overarching philosophical framework that all people of a certain identity should or have to adhere to. And that's where me and feminism disagree, because feminism likes to, by way of intersectionality, claim that identities are essentially philosophical worldviews, and if you don't adhere to what we've presupposed your identity's philosophical worldview to be, there's something wrong with you, which is bullshit. And I'm sure this is slightly far scope, but I'm sure you've seen them doing the same shit with the black quote unquote community. You you if you don't X, you ain't black, etc., and so on. Or or more directly even, if you adhere to a alleged hive mind that isn't your own, then you're possessed by the demon of that other identity. In blackness's case, if you do a certain number of behaviors or think a certain way, then you are ersatz white. I haven't quite ever heard anyone say that that a gay person who doesn't fit the gay hive mind is embracing straightness, but I have heard a fuck ton of you hate yourself, you have Stockholm syndrome, and you're homophobic. So
The phrase internalized homophobia I've seen often on social media.
yeah,
Not
and I don't.
publicly, obviously, but
Yeah, it's interesting, especially when you consider that these conceptions, these hive minds, are often made by pseudo intellectual academics who are not part of the demographic in question. So it's not even a consensus of we got a bunch of gay people together and they all agree this is what gayness is, or we got a bunch of black people together and they all agree this is what blackness is. It's the establishment, the aristocracy, the powers that be going, this is what we think these things are, and if you are unwilling or unable to fit the mold of what we think you should be, then we officially revoke your right to be in this category.
because, as you mentioned, the academics oftentimes are not necessarily a part of the group that they are attempting to, define or assign rules to. So, given that that's the case, why would the residents of that community even give a damn about what they had to say when they're not, you know, when the academics are not a part of that community.
Well, the thing is, it's the problem of I think there are some people who just haven't given it that much thought, and it sounds superficially appealing, or it sounds superficially like it might make sense, and so they become convinced of it, and then once some people within the demographic become convinced of it, then they get the money and clout and power of the establishment behind them, and then the powers that be, by way of the media and so forth, can actually make it seem like if you're not if you're gay but you're not super, thanks for asking, that there might be something wrong with you, which to me is extremely ironic, considering that a lot of the stigma behind homosexuality over the centuries has been if you don't like um your appointed significant other, then there's something wrong with you. Or if you prefer the company of your own gender, then there's something wrong with you, and so on. Like it's one of those, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And not to stretch my bounds here or anything, but I think there's a similar thing going on with with black people as well, in the sense that I think we all know enough about history to know about the concept of the house N word. And I put it to you, what exactly is the difference between someone who is capital B black and someone who is a house N word? They both define themselves and their identities based on what their betters in the upper crust and aristocracy want to define them as. And what's the difference between your a valid X identity and the old chestnut of you're one of the good ones, quote unquote? The more things change, the more they stay the frickin' same, it seems.
It's basically the idea of cozying up to people in authority in order to gain favor and privileges. Meanwhile, the black people who want nobody to have authority over them or to put limits on what they can do, say, or think are ironically being called the house N words.
It is sort of ironic. Those that go along with what the erstwhile masters wanted get treated like they're valid, and now house N word is used as a slur.
Yeah, but I have a, I have I want to bring up a topic that's honestly been that I haven't really quite understood for quite some time. Can we please talk about pride?
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of Pride, probably unsurprisingly if anyone knows me, but
Because the way it was initially told to me is that it's just a way of showing that gay people are people, Americans, just like everybody else, and they shouldn't be maligned just because they're gay. And I'm like,
and they should
yeah,
be
okay,
allowed
that's
to express themselves and so on and so forth. And
yeah, that sounded
on
perfectly
some level, I
reasonable to me.
agree with that, but unfortunately, that's not what Pride is in practice usually.
Yeah, and like years later, like I see like a pride parade on TV, and I'm just absolutely bewildered by what's going on because they seem to be engaging in a lot of behavior that, by many normal standards, would not incur a lot of respect.
And the sort of double-edged sword of this for me is that it would be fine if these people would embrace irreverence and would be fine with irreverence being used on them in turn. But the thing is, Pride has morphed into this. Pride used to be, in my opinion, kind of like the punk movement, in that it was an embracement of your wild, fun, carefree, frolicking side, and therefore was basically your way of embracing who you were in a very public, very flamboyant way. And on some level, I don't have any problem with that. Where it went wrong, as with most of the quote unquote gay community, seems to be that rather than maintain that kind of irreverence for its own sake, we're allowed to express ourselves. So let's be carefree and fancy free and so on and so forth. Let's essentially be like, you know, Frasier or Niles from those various shows and so forth. Like that to me makes perfect sense. But it got intermixed with this, and therefore we have the moral high ground. And that is exactly when everything went to shit. You can be the virtuous, irreverent rebels who were expressing yourselves freely and putting it to the masses and so on and so forth, or you can be the moral establishment who has the moral authority to poo-poo everything else. You can't have it both ways. And not only can you not have it both ways, you shouldn't have it both ways. You can't be the rebels and the empire simultaneously. But
That's
go
that's
ahead.
one aspect that I definitely agree with. But one thing I don't understand is just how much sexualization is involved now and how much it's become just really fetishistic, because a lot of things that people do at pride parades aren't even necessarily in regards to their sexual preferences. It's just like fetish and kink stuff, which, I mean, if you want to do that in your own like home, fine, but like I think it becomes a completely different matter when it's like full on display to the public masses marching down Main Street.
I don't even have as much of a problem with doing that in public when it's with regards to adults. Like if you rent out a park or if you rent out a street space or whatever, so that you can have basically a festival of gay, more or less, because that's basically what Pride is now. Um, that's one thing. It's just like any other type of convention or fandom or niche or whatever. But it's the we are doing this to prove that we are the moral superiors of society thing that I just mentioned. And it's also the let's bring your kids and families, why not? And it's at that point where we all just sort of go, steps back nonchalantly, going for the door.
Yeah, I never understood that. Like, there's this photo that went around the internet of this like guy in like leather fetish dog gear being pet by like a child, and I'm like, okay, dude in dog mask. If you're a reasonable person, what on earth would make you think that that is acceptable behavior?
And given that this is allegedly someone's sexual fetish, one has to wonder why you're letting the child pet you in that instance. Because if you're aroused by furry BDSM, then you probably shouldn't be playing it up like you're a Disney character all of a sudden. Unless the very creepy insinuation is true, in which case, kill it with fire.
Yes, and it's even started to prevail more than just say like a parade. It's starting to go into like TV shows like food products. Like I remember Skittles had a pride campaign, and I remember like an episode of I believe Blue's Clues, which is a show for like toddlers, had a
Yeah,
pride parade
preschool
episode.
age kids, pretty much. Yeah.
Like, you don't want to be ashamed of the fact that you're gay. Perfectly fine, but what is the point in what is the purpose in putting it on a children's show?
And and again, it. it wouldn't be so bad if they weren't so freaking morally superior and smug about it, in the sense of this is the vanguard of the new political or societal paradigm, and if you have a problem with it, you're a retrograde dinosaur from the last ice age or some shit. Like
Yeah, and
I I,
they're
I
sorry,
just
you
don't.
there?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that they're seriously playing with fire here because if it's one area that people really don't play with, it's in regards to kids. And like you said, they have the whole moral authoritarian streak going, where they said, "Well, do you have a problem with what we're doing? Then you're clearly homophobic." But the thing is, if you start involving children, eventually it's going to get to the point where people say, "Okay, I'm homophobic. I don't care anymore."
Now, there's a difference between that and putting it in just an information context of like this is a thing that exists. Like I in retrospect wish that I had known more about this kind of stuff when I was a kid, just because it would have helped me understand myself a little easier rather than going through the rather than going through most of my elementary school age um really just not fitting in anywhere and not really understanding why, and then getting to the point where I'm going through puberty and going, oh, this is why, because I prefer dudes. Neat. um but that being said, just like you shouldn't be indoctrinating kids into heterosexuality at any age prior to puberty, you probably shouldn't be indoctrinating children into any other sexualities prior to the age of puberty, where that part of their brain and or personality develops fully.
Yeah, and there was even like a conversation on the internet when a lot of the stuff from the schools was happening, where they say, "Okay, let's just take all sexuality out of the classroom," and a lot of people said, "Perfectly fine with that. All sexuality gone." And yet there was a large contingent of the woke gay community that were very upset about that.
And shall we address the lispy male choir in the room, the famous "we will convert your children" bit?
That was just awful from both a moral and musical standpoint.
Well, yes, but also it was an optical disaster. And the thing that was frustrating to me was I was looking at that going, even being as charitable as I can to your potential intentions, even steel manning you as much as possible. How could you possibly think this would go over well with anyone ever?
I
Because
saw so many angry gay people underneath that post.
I was one of those angry gay people underneath that post. I was like, I have a famous phrase with regards to certain things. Whenever someone who I'm allegedly on the same side of does something monumentally stupid, especially publicly, um, this is why we can't have nice things. And every fiber of my being, when I saw that video, screamed, "This is precisely why we can't have nice things." Because I get what they were going for, or what they think they were going for inside their own heads. I get it. The idea is supposed to be, let's take the piss out of the reactionary traditionalists, because all converting people to the alleged gay agenda would be is being more tolerant. However, even in the context of that being the alleged, impetus behind this, there are lines in that song that make me not able to believe that interpretation. Like, for example, the line, "You won't approve of where they go at night to protest." That implies that the only way to be gay, or properly gay, or a valid way to be gay is to be an activist or to be a political and philosophical um to be of use to the overall movement. And that's not don't worry guys, we're just treating gay people like everyone else. We're just teaching your children to be tolerant and fair. That's not what that is. That is we are teaching them that the only way to be properly gay is to be an activist, and that protesting is something intrinsically linked with being gay, which that part can fuck right off. And it's funny to me lines like um uh things you tried so hard to keep from their sight like information. Given how censorious and moralistic this particular the overarching intersectional social justice zeitgeist is, when has social justice ever looked at information contrary to its worldview and not gone, grr, disinformation, stifle it, censor it, deplatform it, etc.? And I'm sorry, but if people in Gen Z or Gen Alpha are looking online and are looking for information that their parents and their establishment don't want them to see, they're probably going to see a lot of the anti-feminist, anti-social justice um, stuff from like 2017 and resonate with that. And that ironically is going to be when those very same sorts of guys that do the "We're Coming for Your Children" song panic like no tomorrow, because they think and it really does come back to this. They think they're still the poor put upon rebels sticking it to the establishment. They think they are the rebels in this equation. They think there's still this world spanning tradcon patriarchy out there somewhere trying to stifle them, as though the 80s and 90s never happened, as though Willow and Tara on Buffy the Vampire Slayer in the early 2000s never happened, as though Will and Grace never happened, as though every sitcom from the late 80s up through the 2000s having a gay episode wasn't a thing. Like, I hate to break it to you guys, but once again, you can't be the empire. You can't have the resources and the moral authority of the empire and still think you're the rebels. And
I mean,
because here's the thing, if a person with no power, with genuinely no power, with genuinely an unexpressed viewpoint, acts like a rebel, that's the world basically functioning as it should. That's a rebellious element sticking it to the establishment. That's the world functioning as it should. But when royalty considers themselves to be the rebels and use the resources of the establishment to stifle any contrary position, that is what we call tyranny, very much by definition.
the thing is,
When Luke blows
um,
up the Death Star to stick it to the Sith, that's rebellion. When Emperor Palpatine destroys Alderaan to prove a point to the rebellion, that is tyranny. You know?
I mean, and you just have to look at the things that they do to let you know that they're not put upon, because like if they were the people who were being oppressed, they couldn't get away with half the shit that you see people doing nowadays.
Yeah.
Like,
There's a famous Voltaire quote. If you want to find out who rules over you, find out who you cannot criticize. I've recently started to notice a corollary to that, which is if you want to find out who the actual rebels are, figure out who everyone is demonizing, because the people who are genuinely sticking it to the establishment are not liked by the establishment. The people who get the red carpet rolled out for them by the establishment are at best tools of the establishment, and more likely they're just the establishment.
Um, there is one thing that I want to bring up now, and that is, look, whenever you see gay people portrayed in media, TV, movies, and things, it's always being portrayed with a lot of promiscuity and just casual sexual encounters. But most of the gay people I know are in like very stable, committing relationships. But
Or are
like,
seeking that. Hi.
yeah, or seeking that. But it's like that's not the way they're being portrayed in the mainstream media.
No, no, they are not. And it's gotten to the point where if you're a gay person who isn't into hookup culture, people kind of look at you with the side eye. Like, I can't tell you how many times I have explicitly put only interested in long-term relationship-oriented people on my dating profile on various different romantic dating apps, and people will straight up ignore it and will, like, I have had so many awkward conversations where um someone will show up in my DMs on one of these apps. They'll start talking about flings and hookups and one night stands and stuff, and I'll be like, "Did you not even read my profile?" And they will get mad at me for being a stick in the mud, quote unquote. And I'm like, it's gotten to the point where I've stopped using dating apps entirely because I'm like, my first move when looking at someone on a dating app is to look at their profile. You know, why profiles allegedly are supposed to exist. I can't imagine just scrolling through random dating profiles thinking you found someone that you think looks good and not at least looking at their profile for the sake of like compatibility, shared interests, something to get the conversation going with. But no, apparently some people
Yeah, like,
will literally just use the swipe feature and will look no further than whether someone looks good on in their profile picture, despite the fact that an entire
like
profile
whenever I was
exists underneath it.
whenever I was on dating apps, not anymore, but you know, I would always go through a girl's profile, look at like education, religion, things like that, and if I ever saw that she wasn't interested in kids, that'd be an immediate off for me because I
Yeah.
would like to have kids someday, and I'm like I don't just like click on somebody's profile purely based on pictures. Like I'm looking for other things as well.
Again, that's supposed to be why profiles exist. You know, it's gotten to the point where I wonder why half of these dating apps even have profiles if no one uses them and no one looks at them. Like, why am I putting effort in? Because I put effort into my profile. I'm like, this is specifically what I am looking for. This is my type of guy. Um, if you are that type of guy, if you are, you know, if you do meet these qualifications, which I will not compromise on, then by all means, let's have a chat. If you don't meet these qualifications that I will not compromise on, please, by all means, save us both time
I think one of the
and
reasons,
not bother.
um, I think one of the reasons maybe is that on people's profiles they list their physical characteristics like height, weight, uh, ethnicity, hair color, and so then people can use that to basically filter through potential matches to get ones that meet necessarily their qualifications physically.
But you would think for this system to work, you'd have to have some kind of system of this is what I am and this is what I'm looking for. Because, and I've run into this 1,000 times from Sunday. I generally, when it comes to people I'm looking for, am looking for my opposite. Like I'm a very short, nerdy guy. I prefer taller, muscular, jockey sort of guys. And you would not believe the number of people who have I had to be very rude with because this guy who looks an uncomfortable amount like me would just randomly DM me, and they'll just assume by default that I must be into guys similar to myself, and I'll have to be like, once again, if you read my profile, you would know I explicitly stated I am looking for my better half. I am looking for my opposite. Please do not bother if you are too similar to me. Like, I go through the effort of putting it out there, and I have gotten people mad at me because I'm so confrontational on my dating profiles. But I come at it from the perspective of those who don't ask don't get. As in, if I don't ask specifically for what I want, how the hell am I supposed to ever get anywhere close to what I want? Um, that's always been my thing of like, if I have specific standards, then it's my obligation. It's not even just good for me. It's honestly kind of a politeness thing of like, if I'm looking for a specific kind of person, then both for efficiency reasons and for politeness reasons, it behooves me to put it all out there so that people who don't fit those criteria don't waste their time, or those who are looking for different criteria from me will not waste their time with me and so on. But I still get 5'6" twinkish guys whenever I go on dating apps going, "When are you gonna shave your beard so you'll look more like a twink?" And after about the fifth or sixth time that happens, I get very, very mean. Because the more people will obliviously flout the whole purpose of the dating profile and the whole purpose of dating apps, the more I go zero fucks mode at that point. Like, at that point, my politeness meter has dropped. I did everything I could to be polite to you prior to this. Now you can just go fuck yourself. And then they whine like, "You're so mean, you're so confrontational. No wonder you can't find anyone." Well, I'm sorry, but there's only so many times I can get people explicitly opposite of what I want and explicitly asking things of me that I will not do, that I cease to give fucks at that point. Like, maybe I am a bit of a high maintenance bitch, but you know what? I I admit to that. I admit that I'm a high maintenance bitch. When is everyone else going to admit that they're oblivious and they don't pay attention to the resources that these dating apps provide them?
Now, regarding promiscuity, there's one event that happened uh, a couple years ago. Regarding, do you remember the monkeypox outbreak?
Mm-hmm. The second
Well,
coming of
it
AIDS
was
epidemic that happened like 5 minutes for 5 minutes.
yeah, it
Everyone was
was
all worried that was
monkeypox was
going
a
to be the
disease
new
that was
AIDS,
spreading.
and fortunately, it didn't become a thing. But it was still freaking hilarious while it happened.
Yeah, well, I remember hearing people from like the Center for Disease Control when it was found that this disease was spreading primarily through the gay community. They were urging people to not have sexual intimacy with somebody that you don't know and that who you don't know isn't free of the disease. And I
And
saw
so
like a
many
lot
gay
of
people were like they were
gay
being
people,
personally
especially for
attacked
some
by this.
reason. Yeah, it's like, why are you so upset? I mean, there's a disease going around. It's pretty nasty. I mean, you would think that you yourself would want to be cautious and not just um, have sex with random people who could infect you. Like, you think you would take these necessary precautions.
There's a famous article
I just,
somewhere that was written by a gay guy who was complaining about monkeypox and fear mongering about monkeypox, and he just casually dropped in there, "Oh, I was going to my friend's house for the obligatory Wednesday orgy," and I'm like, in what universe are you like? What in what universe could that sentence even make sense? But apparently, for a certain percentage of people in the gay quote unquote community, especially in cities, there is just this attitude of yeah, orgies every night of the week and twice in the weekend. Why not? Like I don't mm, like that. That's never been
Isn't that how
something I
AIDS spread
desired
so fast?
ever.
I mean,
Hmm?
isn't that how AIDS spread so fast in like the 80s?
I would have to do more research because I genuinely don't know. I remember there was a
Yeah,
lot of I've seen a lot of stuff from the evangelical side of it going this is God's judgment on the gay people and so on, which irrespective of whether gay people did anything to bring this on themselves to some degree, that is still some bullshit. But but um tradcons don't have to be uh good in order for this behavior to be bad, you know? Like I I can reserve judgment for both of you. Like I have enough ire in my system that I can dislike both sets of people in that instance. Like the
given
tradcons
like
are fucked up for
everything
wanting
that was
to
said
institute
around
some
that
kind of
time,
theocracy, and the gay people are fucked up for wanting Wednesday orgies, apparently.
it just, as I was saying, given everything that was being spread around that time, the information disease, couldn't understand why people wouldn't take basic precautions. And also, in that article that you mentioned, he went into very explicit details about the goings ons at those parties, like disturbing details, quite frankly.
Yeah, it was some Sodom and Gomorrah shit up in there.
Yeah, it's like it wasn't just people of the same gender having sex. They were doing some really weird stuff, and the way he wrote it, it was as if he was suggesting that that is just you know stereotypical behavior at these
That's
parties,
just
which
being properly
I
gay
mean,
or something, yeah.
yeah, it's just anyway. Also, I want to bring up the we should have brought this up before, but uh, a couple of years ago there was uh, a group that came about, gays against groomers, who were concerned about um, you know pedophilic infiltration of the gay community, who were basically using that identity as a shield while engaging in their disgusting predilections towards children. And
Hmm.
there were an organization of gay people, lesbians, and some transgender people who were concerned about this and wanted to stop it, expose these people. And they've gotten a lot of hate from certain sides of the gay community and also the mainstream media, who have somehow labeled them homophobic. I don't understand why this label would apply.
I can explain it. It's stupid, but I'll explain it. Once again, the idea is that gayness is some kind of hive mind or ideology or like platonic construct, and therefore the activists. This is something that holds true for basically all sectors of social justice and intersectional bullshit. They don't actually care about the people that are attached to the hive mind. They care about the hive mind, and they essentially want the they don't want people who happen to be gay or people who happen to be black or people who happen to be disabled to have happy functional lives. They want their conception of gayness or blackness or disabledness to basically become present on earth, and therefore any imposition on the people they've defined as properly gay is actually victimizing them because it doesn't let gayness manifest to its fullest degree. And they actually consider this kind of um, unironically degenerate behavior to be something intrinsically linked to gayness. And so by not allowing gay people to be degenerates, they're actually not allowing them to be fully gay or something like that. Never
Yep.
never mind the bunch of gays over in the corner there going, this is not ever what we thought when this is not ever what we meant when we said we were gay. Like your conception of us is wrong. This hive mind of yours does not exist, and more importantly, should not. I, and it's even more infuriating for me because I can't help but look at things in historical context and philosophical context. It's an innate part of who I am basically at this point. And I remember back in the day, most of the fear mongering against gay marriage and the gay community and so on and so forth, when they actually were agreed, was if we let gay people get married, then that's as good as enshrining pedophilia or something. And everyone and their mother rightfully laughed at that because the assumption that gay people were inherently more sexual than straight people, and therefore that means they couldn't help themselves around children or something, or that gayness and pedophilia were morally the same thing. That was such a morally hysterical, laughable thing that that everyone mocked it, and we actually got some actual progress on that. But then these we have to serve the gay hive mind people showed up, and they went and said, actually, yes, the tradcons were wrong for thinking that, but actually they were wrong because they prevented gay people from doing that. In other words, we should totally gay people should totally be allowed to do that because otherwise they're not actually gay. Just like black people should totally be allowed to return to metaphorical monkey, um, because anything that they got from Western civilization is stifling their blackness or something. So we literally need to have people with bone nose rings and shaman haircuts, otherwise we're repressing blackness still. And a bunch of gay people, including me, went like, you do know that we never wanted to be pedophiles, right? We never wanted to do any of that. That was a straw man that was forced upon us. And the activists are going, yeah, they were wrong to stifle it. And it's like, no, they were wrong because that's not the case, you idiots. Oh dear.
I mean, I don't like any reasonable person, uh, in 2023, um, doesn't construe homosexuality with pedophilia. But as you just said, there is a contingent of the quote unquote gay hive mind that is very strongly trying to make that be the case.
And meanwhile, every other gay person is going, this is why we can't have nice things. Because we had actually defeated the evangelicals worried about pedophilia for the most part. Like in the 90s, in the 2000s, we had gotten to a point where no one thought gay equals pedophile. And the activists looked at that and went, stop stifling gayness. You should let them fiddle the kids. And I'm like, no, we didn't. This isn't something we wanted. This isn't something that we came up with. It's something that was foisted upon us. And it was something that was wrong once upon a time. And you're making it true. And meanwhile, you're starting to make the crazy, God hates F words people from yesteryear look sensible. It's just like it's just like how I feel about the Red Scare in the 50s and 60s. Yes, it's silly to persecute people for being communists in Hollywood because there's no evidence that they're forcing communism into movies. But that doesn't still be the case if a bunch of actual communists consider it a moral good, a moral duty to actually force communism into things. And yes, the Tradcon evangelicals were wrong to think that gay people equal pedophiles, but they come off as a lot less wrong if you actually start pro pedophile activism, you idiots.
And the weird thing is that a lot of the mainstream establishment is on the side of the hive mind, which in any other period of history would be absolutely unthinkable.
Yeah, because I think because the intersectional feminist types have cloaked their framework in moral terms so long that a lot of the establishment is actually convinced that this is the next frontier of effectively the civil rights movement. Meanwhile, the actual next frontier of the civil rights movement, the one that we created this show to kind of focus on, the men's rights show, the men's rights portion of the civil rights movement, the one that got ignored previously, um, that's still persona non grata among the establishment, which again, if you want to find out what the establishment approves of and who they don't, figure out who they lionize and who they demonize. They're lionizing the they're lionizing the intersectional feminists and demonizing to hell and back um, geek culture, nerd culture, by which I mean sincere geek and nerd culture, not hipster culture, and anything resembling anti-feminism or men's rights. So where do you think the actual grassroots um, social issue can be found? Because in general, the place that society needs to focus on is the place that at least wants to. And the place it least wants to for the last 10 years or so has been anything that involves meritocracy, anything that involves men's rights or anti-feminism, and anything that involves sincere nerd culture and geekdom. So in 50 years, if you're actually concerned with being on the right versus wrong side of history, generally the people getting hate thrown at them are the people who are vindicated eventually. And the people who have the moral high ground and the moral authority get treated like prudish cunts who need to be brought down a peg. And then in the next generation or so, they get brought down a peg. It's exactly what happened with the Tradcon evangelicals and the Bushite warmongers back in the day, as well it should have. But where do you suppose this is going to lead you, intersectional social justice feminists, when history comes home to roost? And unsurprisingly, people like Gamergate, Comicsgate, the Phantom Menace, um, and the men's rights movement were on the right side of history, and you were on the wrong side of history all along, just very much despite and ironically because of your claims to the contrary.
Yeah. These are the people who believe that all progress, no matter what it is, in every area, is always a good thing, and it's obviously not. But because they oftentimes, identify themselves in contrast to who they view as their enemy. And
Mhm.
so, if their enemy is the conservatives, obviously they have to be the progressives. And what do progressives do? They promote progress. Now, whether that progress is good or bad is completely immaterial.
Well, it's even more insidious than that because I would say that genuine organic progress is generally a pretty good thing. It's that they're erroneously identifying where the progress needs to happen because The progress that they think they still are fighting for already happened decades ago. The actual places where society needs to progress, like um like caring about men ever, or stop treating actual nerds like pariahs, um they still demonize. It's funny to me that they still hate the nerds. They still hate actual nerds. All they've done is taken away the word nerd, mixed it together with the word hipster, and called that a good thing, while calling any actual genuine geekdom either toxic fandom or incels. Combine the image of the toxic fan and the image of the incel, and you have a damn close approximation to what the people of yesteryear thought nerds were. Which again, it just goes to show you the establishment likes to have the moral high ground, but they rarely do, because by the time something has evolved to the point of becoming mainstream and part of the establishment, it's already been accomplished. Like, you don't need to tell people to be good people in order to make them good people, because whatever thing you're telling them, they already know. It's the places that they're not allowed to go that need the focus put on them. That's where actual progress happens. It doesn't happen in the halls of academia and in the halls of the clergy. It happens in the grassroots, in the organic parts of society.
Also, I think their methodology is very wrong because even on things that they necessarily have a point on, they usually engage in their protest and activism by either being violent or being assholes.
Yeah, and they actually consider it moral to be assholes to the right people. And
Like,
and violence is good so long as it's doing good things, allegedly.
yeah, it's like they have the saying that there's no bad tactics, only bad targets, which is evil
Yeah,
and inherently untrue. I mean, I don't know if we've gone on this before, but I firmly believe that the means by which you accomplish something matter because that's going to define the end result of it in the end.
and if I may take a minute to completely eviscerate the phrase "the ends justify the means," that is categorically not true, because if it were true, you wouldn't notice the means. The only time the phrase "the ends justify the means" get trotted out is when you intuitively and instinctively know there is something wrong about the means, and so you trot out the phrase "the ends justify the means" in order to essentially coddle yourself into thinking you didn't do anything wrong. When ends and means are actually equivalent or actually follow from each other, nobody notices because it's an organic thing. Of course, you're going for this goal, so you would choose this end. When when you need to use the phrase "the ends justify the means" is precisely when they don't, because you notice the dissonance between the end and the means. And very often the ends don't justify the means purely because the ends and means don't follow into each other. They don't correlate with one another. Which says to me that if you need the ends to justify the means, then there's something logically wrong with your framework, and those means will not ever lead to those ends, regardless of morality, because it
I
doesn't
mean,
follow.
certainly not the end that you envisioned, um, because all right, say you're want to tackle the homeless crisis, and you say the ends justify the means, no matter what it takes. We want to end homelessness in America, and
And you
so
end it
once you
by killing a bunch of homeless people.
yes, like you will technically bring about the end that you stated. There will be no more homeless people, but the means by which you accomplished it would be so horrific. It would. be perfectly justified to throw you in jail for the rest of your life.
or into the death. Like at that, given how many homeless people there are, I'm pretty sure that would qualify as a genocide. If someone actually unironically went gas the homeless people, that would probably at this point be about 1 billion people.
Well, there's not a billion people in the United States, but if we're
No,
talking
but
globally,
I mean, if you instituted this worldwide, if someone actually went through, let's say Klaus Schwab gets it into his head to try this and goes, we will force you onto the pod, or we will kill you so you won't be homeless, and that will be a good thing. Like if the UN put all their emphasis behind that, I'm pretty sure the world over there's probably about 1 billion homeless people. Now, mind you, the evil German mustache man, that I'm not gonna point out because YouTube, um, only killed 6 million Jews and however many millions of others in the various other demographics he was killing. Um, so gassing the homeless people would probably be worse than the Holocaust.
exactly right. Now, we've been going for an hour 16. Do you have any final thoughts about the gay community?
Dear gay people the world over, intersectional feminism is not your friend. We are, regardless of what you want to believe, gay rights issues are just an extension in many ways of men's rights issues. Don't let your gayness supersede and subvert your maleness. We should, if anything, the gay community should be lousy with men's rights advocates, because, or at the very least, the male half of the gay community should be lousy with men's rights advocates. Um, because many of the problems that the gay community suffered from are mostly just hyper specialized versions of things that all men suffer with or from. So don't let them sell you the you're feminine just like a woman and therefore you must be oppressed feminist talking point. You're being ignored and marginalized and belittled because you are a man first and foremost. Everything else is just a level of specialization after that.
My final words would be uh, to to all the gay people out there who are perfectly reasonable and respectable human beings, do not let the most extreme, insane, and outrageous parts of your group define what it means to be gay in the public zeitgeist, because that's just going to lead to a whole mess of problems.
It's gonna bring the tradcons back. I worry horror. I spend like days and nights worrying about the unnecessary amount of legitimacy that the incompetence of social justice spoils in the direction of tradcon evangelical bullshit. I want to go back to the 90s where neither of these groups mattered. That's what I want. I want a world where nobody has the moral authority to censor and stifle and prudishly mandate over people's lives. I like a world of populism and libertarianism and irreverence. I don't want a morally elitist culture to take root. But the more incompetent social justice is and makes everyone else look by proxy, the more people look at that and go, well, if it's a two-horse race between social justice and family values, I pick family values. Derp. And the world will be plunged back into a theocratic dark age before you can say gas the burn the heretic, drown the witch. And considering I'm both of those, Please don't let it get that far, guys.
Don't worry, it'll be safe.
I'm not traditionalistic enough for the tradcons, and I'm not subversive enough for the SJWs. Life is hell.
Everybody, I have been Mystery.
I've been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator. We have been the Duality of Man, and this has been us reminding you to keep it gay, but don't, for the love of God, be feminist about it.
Bye, everybody.